China Watch Radio is brought to you in part by Sushi Market Sprouts on 7th in Santa Cruz and Kaito in the Capitol Mall Food Court. Treat yourself to the finest Japanese cuisine you'll find anywhere with fresh sushi to go and delicious ramen dinners. Sushi Market Sprouts and Kaito. Yum! Well, it's Thursday. Good afternoon. I'm Bill Graff. This is China Watch Radio. I'm here with Jonty Collier and David Welch. Michael Olson is away today, and we, first of all, say hello to both of you. Good morning.
Good afternoon.
Well, I guess it's good afternoon by now.
Well, China is good morning, so you're on cue.
Don't confuse me. Hi, Jonty. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Billy.
All right. We have quite a show for you folks today. Even though Michael Olson is away, he's actually taking some much-needed time off, which is unusual for Michael. We have quite a show for you today. There's a lot of stuff going on. We are likely to see China to seize some things going in relation to Taiwan. We are also likely to hear some very interesting things from Xi Jinping. And, of course, Jeff Bezos has launched a China conspiracy theory. We'll talk about that as well. There's a whole bunch of other stuff going
Throwing
on.
stones in glass houses.
We're going to start off today with Jonty Collier as he has some very interesting things to tell us.
Well, I came across an article that drew my attention. The title is... this is in the Taiwan News. That's the name of the news organization. China very likely to seize Taiwan's Kinmen as distraction. There's some sort of unnamed official. I'm always a little skeptical when you have an unnamed official. So first of all, this isn't a Chinese, a mainland Chinese CCP official. This is a Taiwanese official speaking anonymously, suggesting that it's very likely. I'm not sure exactly what very likely could mean. A couple different things in this circumstance.
It's very likely propaganda.
But well, it's something. It's something. I don't want to make that assessment independent of all of the information that I'd like to provide the audience with. But just to give some background here, Taiwan. Most of us think of the island traditionally known as Formosa, which is. It's about 150 miles away from mainland China, and it's the large island with the vast majority of Taiwan's, I think, 2.2 million population on it. That's what most people think of when they think of Taiwan. But at the end of the, to the extent to which it did end, but it's a sort of by and large cessation of major military activities at the end of the Chinese Civil War. In 1949, the Chiang Kai-shek's forces, the forces opposed to the CCP, were still in possession of a handful of islands very close to the coast of mainland China. Probably the most significant of those is Kinmen. Kinmen sits in a harbor about 10 miles away from the coast of mainland China, depending on exactly where you want to look. But it's give or take, it's within that sort of range. The CCP launched a major military operation in 1949, known as the Battle of Gintao. The CCP forces sent about 10,000 folks, military personnel, over in what was essentially fishing boats, wooden fishing boats, to invade the island. Now the ROC forces had actually been a little bit more prepared than the CCP realized, and though they ended up, long story short, dramatically losing the battle, losing most of those forces, most of the fishing boats, which they were heavily reliant on. They had something like 100,000 troops on the other side of the channel, but they couldn't get them across because they lost all of the fishing boats in the first wave. So that became a kind of rallying moment for what later became the Taiwanese forces, because they got pretty used to losing towards the end of that war. They were consistently losing to the People's Republic Army forces on mainland China in these big sort of mainland battles. But boy, could they defend islands. The peace the tentative peace that arose there in 1949 didn't last very long. At the end of the Korean War, I believe there was a little bit of opacity. There was a little bit of confusion as to whether or not the U.S. would include all of these islands right close to the coast of mainland China in their agreement with Taiwan to help defend Taiwan. And so in 1954, the CCP started shelling the island. I believe there were actually some small invasions, but none of them. They were all at some of the stranger, more obscure islands, and it didn't amount to anything, as I recall.
Jonty, to clarify, these are the same islands that China has begun building up in recent years, correct?
The communist China doesn't have any say over these islands because they are military protectorates of Taiwan, essentially. So I'm discussing the attempts by the previous attempts by the CCP to capture these islands from Taiwan.
Okay.
So we had the second Strait crisis in 1958. Basically, the CCP just shelled the crap out of the place, but it was a military fortress essentially, and it was not really open to civilians so much. The Taiwanese had sort of locked the place down. I just want to read an excerpt just to show how long this situation has been progressing. This is Senator John F. Kennedy answering a question in a Kennedy-Nixon debate as to whether we should or shouldn't defend these islands. And I quote, "Well, the United States has on occasion attempted, mostly in the middle 50s, to persuade Chiang Kai-shek to pull his troops back to Formosa. I believe strongly in the defense of Formosa. These islands are a few miles, 5 or 6 miles off the coast of Red China, with a general harbor area and more than 100 miles from Formosa. We have never said flatly that we will defend Quemoy or Matsu if it is attacked." Those are some of the other. There's a variety of islands. In fact, I think Quemoy is a different name from Kinmen. "We say we will defend it if it's part of a general attack on Formosa, but it is extremely difficult to make that judgment." He goes on to list all the variety of generals who say that, look, we can't defend these because it's right off the coast of mainland China and we don't have a way to supply forces there. So this is 1958. It's not a new thing that these islands have been called into question in terms of their viability as a place that a line can be drawn and we can say the communist China will go no further. Nixon's retort was essentially to say that we have to make it very clear that we're not going to give another inch. Interestingly enough, it was Nixon in 1979 who was shifting the diplomatic recognition of who was China from Taipei to Beijing. At any rate, so the islands remained occupied. They ceased to be a military zone under martial law in 1992. That might have been in relation to an incident that happened in 1987 where some folks, I think, hoping to escape, essentially, showed up in a boat, and the Taiwanese military was under orders to shoot anybody that approached the island. Right. So they killed some 17 civilians or something along those lines. So in 1992, they dropped the martial law. There's currently a population of about 127,000 people in the what's called the county of Kinmen. There are somewhere in the order, I tried to find this out, there's somewhere in the order of about 5,000 to 10,000 soldiers defending Kinmen. It's obviously well defended. They've had quite a long time to build up their defenses there. But we're not necessarily talking about a very substantial force. The Taiwanese military standing army sits at about 200,000. Very large reserve force, though.
Look, can I
reserve
put
force
something in perspective while we consider this whole thing? You were talking islands 6 to 10 miles off the coast.
Yeah.
Okay, let me just put it in perspective for you Californians. Catalina Island, off the coast of California, well-known resort off the coast of Los Angeles, is 26 miles out. Okay? So this is considerably closer than Catalina Island to mainland China.
Oh, I mean, you can just about throw a rock.
Yeah, it would take you less than a 20-minute boat ride probably to get there in a really slow boat.
So here's the rub. What actually happens in the case where China says, "Look, we're going to take this island and just try and stop us"? To what extent does Taiwan invest their military resources in the defense of this island? And to what extent does the United States enter into the situation? And Japan and AUKUS and whatnot. I just sort of see it as a place that it really frightens me, because it may seem like a low-hanging fruit to a disheartened and a China that's going through some sort of major upheaval and transition.
Yes.
May see as a low-hanging fruit for Xi to be able to take this to the People's Congress and say, "Look, see, I've begun to achieve the historical objective, the CCP's historical objective of recapturing or liberating, as they would see it, the remainder of the territory that we believe belongs to us." It may certainly be within reason to think that, given the massive disparity in forces in that particular place, that the CCP would be able to actually occupy those islands.
Yeah, unless the government of Taiwan had significant warning time to call in help.
Yes. Well, the thing is, what does help look like these days?
Yeah, exactly.
Because boots on the ground aren't necessarily that valuable an asset. In fact, those are probably the least valuable assets in a war that covers areas of ocean. The important assets are things like China's missile cruisers. Those are incredibly valuable assets. Anybody that's got a submarine that can enter any of these areas and begin shooting off torpedoes. That's an incredibly valuable asset. And then, of course, all their retrospective air forces.
Sure.
And
I was going to say in this short, like you said, 6 to 10 miles is not that far. Armed drones could be considered as significant help.
Yeah, when I was in the region for extended period of time, the thought was, because I asked questions too about why does Taiwan have most of its army on these remote islands instead of the main island itself, and the answer I got was that if those islands were undefended, China would indeed come and simply ride up a boat and seize them fairly easily, and they wanted their tripwire for world outrage to be as early as possible. And so it provided not only a lack of staging ground for China to move forward to the mainland, but it also been provided that call to help or that call to action worldwide to get involved.
Yeah, 6 miles is pretty close.
Yeah.
And how,
right.
So how far is for instance, how far would Kinmen be from Taiwan itself? How many miles is that? Do you know?
I think it's about 150.
Yeah, so it's better to be tripped at 6 miles than 100 miles.
Right.
Absolutely.
The thing, though, that I think people fail to realize is the degree to which warfare has changed since.
Oh, we found that out in Ukraine, haven't we?
Well, no, we haven't at all.
You don't think so?
Well, let me explain. So, the United States has the 4 branches of the military. Oh, unless you include the Space Force. So you got the
5.
Air Force and the Navy and the Marines and the Army.
Don't forget the Coast
China,
Guard. The veterans will be upset.
China has its own designation in its military for the rocket forces. there's about 150,000 people in China's rocket forces. So they take intermediate range and medium range missiles extremely seriously. And any sort of war between Taiwan and China, the role of missiles is pretty much is eminent. I think in a way that they never have been before. Likewise, it's really important, I think, to note that Taiwan has its own domestic missile business. They've been building their own missiles, quote unquote, for defense. Now, they've got a missile that's called the HF-2E. They've had that for quite a while. They don't like to talk about what its capabilities are, but it's estimated that this thing, it can definitely hit mainland China with certain modifications. It might even be able to go as far as Beijing. The Taipei Times reported in 2008 that the president at the time had ordered over 500 to 1,000 of these missiles to be produced. And it was in 2011 that they approved full volume serial production of these missiles. And that's not their most advanced missile. That's a couple decades old at this point in time. So Taiwan also has a substantial missile force. They're able to strike mainland China. Now, what happens? I'm really curious what you guys think of this. What happens when she is bravely fulfilling the party's promise to reunite the mother country or whatnot, and missiles start raining down on Beijing?
Well, it's interesting because when we talk about missiles, I'm unclear about modern missile capability in any country, but I do remember as a child, I grew up in the Sacramento River Delta, not too far away from Travis Air Force Base, and I knew of many Nike missile silos around that particular military base. And I've seen one of them accidentally launched when I was a kid. We were driving home from Fairfield, which is near Travis Air Force Base.
They look wicked, too. They look like the meanest dart, don't they?
It was flying along at like...
Mach 5.
Yeah, it was really low.
Yeah.
And it suddenly hit the ground and stopped. Somebody apparently turned it off, and then they came out and got it, and it, went away.
Wow.
But I would think that if Taiwan were to launch missiles toward Beijing, I would just speculate, because I'm only speculating because I don't know for sure, but it would seem to me China would have some sort of countermeasure to try to take those missiles out before they hit the ground, I would think.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, China has an air defense system. It's got some strange designation that I couldn't possibly remember. It's something like HF-17 or something. But it is considered comparable to Russia's S-300.
Okay,
it's
so they
slightly shorter range, slightly better electronic warfare, or something like that.
Yeah. The missiles raining down on Beijing would probably not have the desired effect, at least not initially, because China has a counter defense system that would try to stop that from happening.
The existence of a counter defense system doesn't mean the deployment of a counter defense system that is up to the task of protecting your city or your all of your important targets from some 1,000 plus.
Asking the
missiles.
Rhetorical question: are you now referring to Star Wars, which we have no evidence that it works at all?
Well, look.
Just kidding.
In terms of missile defense, we've got the U.S. has the Patriot missile system. It's got a dinky little range, but they're specifically designed to try and shoot down ballistic missiles. The Russians developed the S-300, but really a pretty astounding piece of equipment. It has many sort of comparable abilities to the Patriot missile system. It apparently shot down a lot of Tomahawks in Syria. when under operation by the Syrians, by the way, who weren't very competent. They also have an S-400. They've claimed that the S-400 will shoot down a hypersonic missile. It has a much longer range than the S-300, and they have an S-500, which is shooting down your planes as they're taking off from the airport, right? So there's some interesting things to be understood there, but then it ends up being this sort of game of numbers. Who shoots first in large enough volume to overwhelm the adversary's defenses, and do you have the ability to blow up their defenses in such a way as to make it a moot point whether or not they have those defenses?
Well, according to Jane's, the defense, briefing site, Taiwan since 2018 has invested $249 billion in modernizing their facilities and their missiles, and they're actually looking at improving the manufacturing capacity by over 50% for them to make missiles locally. So they're clearly, gearing up for, obviously they're in an arms race, but maybe they're in the game as well as trying to overwhelm defenses.
That's 4 years ago. In 4 years, if your manufacturing capability is any good at all, 4 years, they're probably up to snuff already.
Especially growing it by a half.
Yeah. So, well, it's a very interesting way to start our program today, for sure,
I want to put one final nail in the coffin of this story. One of the main reasons why we ever had an intermediate range nuclear forces treaty between the United States and the Soviet Union was that a shorter range, the deployment of a short range missile system or medium range missile system puts everybody in it makes everyone scared, because it's gonna be a couple minutes. It's currently thought to be about 6 minutes between the point at which the CCP decides they want to start hitting Taiwan and the missiles actually start landing. So the thing is, China has, we know, nuclear warheads. They have a hypersonic missile that they can interchange nuclear warheads or conventional warheads on. And Taiwan, up until I think it was 1987, had a nuclear weapons program. Supposedly in 87, the U.S. came and said, look, you guys got to shut it down if you want us to defend you. Whether or not they maybe still have a nuclear warhead lying around somewhere, hey, I don't know. But in the event that missiles begin to be exchanged between these two entities, how do you know it's a conventional missile when it enters your airspace? And the answer, of course, is that you don't. So the low-hanging fruit of Kinmen Island could end up being the spark for a much more devastating conflict. Let's hope that doesn't happen.
Yeah, boy, isn't that the truth. Well, let's go from this rather startling discussion to one that's even more fascinating to me. There is a fellow, Wang Wenbin, a foreign ministry spokesperson for the CCP, who has come up with a startling, and I find somewhat interesting sentence. The United States is a master of disinformation. That's like the kettle calling the pot black.
Yeah.
But he makes some interesting points in this article. The United States purports to maintain the centrality of the UN Charter, but it's clear to everyone that what the U.S. is doing is quite the opposite, according to this fellow. And I thought it was an interesting bit of discussion that Jonty also wants to elaborate on a little bit. This is fascinating to me that the rest of the world thinks we're in the business of disinformation. And if you watch the evening news and you watch, let's say, Fox, and then you turn the channel a couple of minutes later and you turn on NBC, and then you turn the channel a few minutes later and you watch CNN, and then you turn on another channel and you watch, some foreign, like Al Jazeera or BBC or somebody, you get 4 or 5 completely different versions of the same story.
Yeah, there's a lot of avenue for pushback and debate. here, even though they claim there is and I understand. I mean, every governmental administration of every country around the world has a narrative that they want to push forward. I mean, we see Jen Psaki as the speaker from the press secretary
but
trying to promote a point of view.
You can see Jen Psaki say something.
Exactly.
And then watch the different channels report what she said, and it's a completely different narrative.
And fact check as well. No, I agree with you. There isn't that opportunity in China, obviously. We've covered that a lot on this show.
Well, there isn't that opportunity within China, but us as citizens of a democracy where we at least like to think that we have some say in what our government does, what do we do? How do we approach this? And the real reason why I wanted to post the foreign ministry spokesperson's little piece here is that it is a harsh critique of the United States. And sometimes if you're going to solve a problem, you have to understand what other people think of you or whatever other people think is going on. It's very difficult to solve any kind of a problem or issue if you just sort of ignore or even understand. It's very difficult to understand the issue unless you're willing to at least just hear what their perspective is.
But they have it's almost like there's a reflexive motion to blame the United States, right? They blamed us for COVID, right? They blamed us for the aggression in the pushback in the Ukraine, right? We can kind of go on and on down the list. When you listen to the spokesman in China,
and we've done the same thing to them. The media, when they first said the United States must have, let the virus out, we all went, wait a minute, we don't think so.
Yeah,
this was not a bat from across the country. This was the Wuhan lab.
Let me just read the next two sentences of what this guy is saying. So rather than debate whether or not we should listen to him, we just take a second and listen to him.
Yeah.
When the UN Security Council refused to authorize the U.S. use of force in the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, Iraq, Syria, and other places, the U.S. and NATO bypassed the UN and wantonly interfered in and waged wars on sovereign states. The U.S. claims to respect human rights, but the wars of aggression launched by the U.S. and its allies against countries including Afghanistan and Iraq made over 26 million people refugees. And he continues. We don't necessarily need to read the whole thing, but I can't. I mean, what I said in the run-up to the invasion of Iraq was, this is a really bad idea, guys, because this is going to have knock-on effects. This is going to make us the country that we're no longer going to be able to say we're the country that defends democracy and sovereignty and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Not saying that Iraq was a democracy or anything like that, but obviously if we're going around sort of unilaterally or with our little club of friends invading sovereign states and then essentially occupying them, we're going to lose a major moral high ground.
Credibility.
There is some of that.
And here it is. Here it is. 20 years later, here's the foreign ministry spokesperson for the CCP saying, you guys don't have any credibility in this area because of what you did. So, I mean, I feel a little bit as though that perspective that I wasn't alone in having at that time has been...
to your point, we can't, as a country, compromise our values. And when we do, it does come back to haunt us. Nobody's perfect, but we do have to stick to who we are and the values of our independence and constitution and kind of as we are society.
But we have made some pretty big mistakes,
and we will. We're not going to be perfect. But I would actually just push back a little bit, Jonty, in that we left Afghanistan and we left Iraq, and we had, in the case of Afghanistan, it went back to the Taliban by force. But we had elections, and they've maintained a democracy now in Iraq, and we're not there, right? We weren't there to colonize. We were there to fix what we thought was a national security issue.
But look at what worldview on that is right now. Yeah. We should have taken a clue from every other country who tried to do the same thing we tried to do in Afghanistan, got their butts kicked, including the Russians.
Yeah, I mean, we weren't trying to take over the country, which was good.
Neither were the Russians. They were just trying to
we weren't trying to take over Iraq. I mean, that's a debatable assertion.
We wanted influence, but the point is we're gone, right? We don't have any troops in either of those countries.
There's still few troops of
Iraq a little bit. Yeah.
The other thing that I found fascinating about this statement from the the foreign ministry of the CCP is this. They point out, some of the things the United States has done that sort of detract from the high moral ground, so to speak. And I was thinking of last night's news where the President of the United States asked Congress for 33, if I remember right,
$33 billion, yeah.
$33 billion more. We've already given them $16 billion to support Ukraine against the Soviet Union. Now, the high moral ground is we're not fighting the Soviets. And also, but in reality, if any moron could figure out this, we are, in fact, fighting the Russians because we're supplying all the armament to the guys fighting the Russians.
Yeah, there was an accusation of it being sorry, Jonty. There was an accusation of it being a proxy war.
It is
Russia.
A proxy war.
In some ways, you could argue that. I would say, though, that a lot of the aid that's been approved so far actually went to refugees, help Poland and Romania.
I'm sorry, but most of the money's gone to really extensive missile batteries and helicopters and jets and all kinds of stuff like that. I'm sorry. Look at the bill.
Yeah. Well, a lot of it has, but the money that was earmarked from Congress so far had the $33 billion now is new. That's going to be more direct military aid, was my understanding. But the prior tranche of cash that was approved was
not according to
refugees.
The figures I've seen.
Yeah.
Most of that's military hardware.
Yeah.
Well, it's also important to put in context just how much can you possibly spend on military hardware and have it even make any sense. I mean, you can't just decide you're going to buy $30 billion worth of rifles because there aren't even going to be enough people in the country to have to actually hold. Right. I mean, every single citizen is going to have 6 rifles. So there's a bit of context there. Essentially, NATO has been supplying a tremendous amount of military hardware to Ukraine.
They have a lot of that came out of inventory too. Like I know in the case of the Germans, right, when they supplied 1,000 of the Javelin missiles, they pulled that out of their inventories.
Let me put it in context, okay? What was asked for, if you believe the report I saw on 2 separate networks, the total expenditure up to this point, less than half a year, is $61 billion.
Including the current.
Right.
$61 billion. Now, the last full year in Afghanistan, we only spent $41 billion. Now, we're going at twice the spending speed in the Ukraine right now.
No, I actually laughed. I saw the headline on CNN. I only read the headlines there because I can't usually tolerate to read the crap. But the headline said Biden asked for $33 billion, also says it's not a proxy war. I mean, what's wrong here, people? I don't know.